Hi, welcome everybody to tonight's special event. We have the honor to host not just the CEU Executive MBA Open Day here in Vienna, but we're also happy to welcome our friends from Bridge to this event because we have something to offer to them. I will talk about it later. I'm Thomas Lamel, the Senior Program Manager of the CEU Executive MBA, and I will guide you through this evening. Let me start off this evening with a program presentation about CEU and the Executive MBA. Later on, we will have the opportunity to talk to a current participant. If you have any questions about the program or the event, please feel free to use the chat box or raise your hand. I will collect the questions for a potential Q&A session after the program presentation. Then you will have the opportunity to enjoy a keynote presentation by our faculty member, Professor Matthias Marshall. And afterwards, after the keynote presentation, we'll have the opportunity to get an update from Bridge and an opportunity for a lively debate about what's going on in the Bridge universe and what they're up to. So without further ado, I would like to move on to maybe the problem you're facing right now. The question that you are facing as potential applicants or HR professionals is the question, is an MBA still worth it? Because you don't have to go very far these days to encounter that we are witnessing fundamental transformations in a world in a century. In 2008, we've seen a big financial crisis. In 2015, we've seen a refugee crisis. And right now, we're in the biggest pandemic in a century. Speaking of, this event is fully online because university operations have been moved online, unfortunately. We're very sorry about it, but numbers in Vienna are peaking again, and we don't want to put anybody at risk here. So these changes are part of a much broader set of transformation that is taking place right now. And some of them are positive, of course, but some of them are pretty dangerous. And the key question is, how do we as business professionals, how do you as business professionals prepare for this challenging and unpredictable environment? And the obvious question is an MBA the way to do it? Over the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion of online education, and I'll show you why we believe our MBA is still worth it. So if you're interested in further education as a potential applicant or an HR professional, you usually start reaching for the stars. You're looking at the best business schools in the world because, of course, you deserve the best education out there. What the top business schools in the world offer to you is a very differentiated, mission-driven MBA curriculum. That means that these business schools, mostly in the US or in the UK, offer a certain expertise, a certain perspective or values or a certain mission to their program. They actually offer a global faculty, which means the faculty comes from around the world. It's a very diverse, very international faculty with top credentials coming from the best universities in the world, like Ivy League universities on the East Coast in the US or Switzerland or the United Kingdom. Also, you will find in those leading business schools a very international student body. We all know the campus experience at American universities, that this offers a very international experience for everybody who had the joy to already experience such an exchange semester, for example, in the US. I was just talking about the campus experience. This differs very much from the continental European approach, where we don't have this campus experience at most universities, but American universities not only offer the campus as a location, they offer a campus as a family, a community, and infrastructure. But the downside is that these leading business schools, with all the advantages, have disadvantages too, because we all know that these business schools tend to be very pricey. They start at a tuition of 120,000 euro or even more expensive than that, in addition to other expenses like traveling and housing. Since most of these programs are full-time, in a full-time format, you are required to leave your job for at least 1 year or even more than 1 year, sometimes 2 years, if you're joining these programs in the US. And moving to the US or any other location for such a full-time format requires you to potentially relocate your family as well to the new MBA location. So if you're frightened off by all these things, you basically start to look for an MBA in your city. What you tend to find is mostly a pretty standard curriculum, a so-called vanilla MBA curriculum without any expertise, without any certain perspective. The faculty who are teaching the program are pretty much national or regional in the best case, or transnational, but not really international. So is the student body. The number of international students in these programs is relatively low, maybe only national or transnational, regional, but not really international from all continents. Another downside is that even those programs are pretty expensive, starting or at 50,000 euro or even more expensive at 80,000 euro of tuition, again, in addition to expenses and housing. A good thing is that there is no work interruption mostly in those programs. So you can stay on your job because you're in the city that you live in, and you can actually attend this program in the city you live in. So what we do at CEU is to offer the best of these two worlds. First of all, there's no work interruption, thanks to the practical and flexible modular format. I will talk about it later. The Executive MBA for the open world, as we call our program, is very much mission-driven. We have a clear mission, and I will talk about this philosophy later in this presentation. We do have an international student body because of the modularity of the program. Participants can fly in, can fly out, which is a major advantage of the program. By the way, according to the Times Higher Education, CEU is the second most international university in the world. And maybe the most compelling argument for you is tuition. We offer tuition at only 29,000 euro for the whole program, including all credits. And when we say world-class faculty and international faculty, we really mean it. For example, Professor Aistusenius with a PhD from Central Florida. She's an expert on marketing, especially in emotional marketing. Or for economics, Professor Mark Kaufmann, an expert in applied theory with a PhD from Harvard University. The course on big data and artificial intelligence will be taught by Miklos Koren, one of the leading scholars in this field in Europe with a Harvard PhD too. If you are new to finance, Joy is a uniquely gifted educator. Generation after generation of our students just tell us how she's just unique in explaining complex financial concepts and give you a simple language to understand and to use when you're talking to your stakeholders. For leadership, Austin, our world-class psychologist with executive education experience on 4 continents. He will lead the way. If you're already experienced in finance, you will be placed in the advanced track course with Professor Adam Zawodowski, a leading expert on complex investments with a PhD from Princeton. Or for innovation, you'll have Mike Labelle, who holds a prestigious EU Jean Monnet chair. Sophia Barani with a PhD from LSE, from the London School of Economics. She's an expert on the future of work, especially in automation, artificial intelligence, and robotics. Or our faculty director, Professor Maciej Kieślowski, with a JSD degree from Yale, an MBA from ASEAD, and an MPA from Princeton. He's an expert on non-market strategy and regulatory affairs. And last but not least, for strategy, you'll have Yusuf Akbar, who has taught in more than 40 countries and advises leading Fortune 500 companies. Just to give you an example of our visiting faculty, as I already said, we focus on international faculty coming from the best universities in the world, and this is being reflected in the visiting faculty body as well. For example, we invite Professor Christian Selos, an expert on innovation from Stanford University, to teach in our modules. Or Professor Miklos Savary, an expert on digital marketing from Columbia University. Professor Omar Hernandez, an expert on operations management from Berkeley Hess Business Schools. Or Professor Hui Zhen from the University of Zurich. And last but not least, Professor Paula Caproni from the University of Michigan. This is just a little impression for you to get an understanding of who is the faculty that we are inviting you to teach. So here's what the program looks like. As you can see, it's a 10-module program. The dates you see on the screen are not going to change. So you can basically plan your studying around professional and family activities based on these dates. As you can see in the top row, we have 3 modules in the first year. In the center row, you can see that we have 4 modules in the second year and 3 modules in the third year, which gives you flexibility and a balance in your life. You might have noticed that we are piggybacking around popular European holidays, like November 1st, May 1st, or August 15th, when it's easier for you to take time off and to juggle your study life with your work life without any disruption or little disruption. In the summers, which is the center column on the slide, our bespoke and cutting-edge leadership program takes place in Budapest, and you'll have the opportunity to benefit from electives from the faculty in the world we invite to teach your classes. So one day, eventually, there will come the day when you finish with us and you will join the CEU alumni network from around the world. As I already said, CEU is the second most international university in the world, and you can rely on an active elite network on every continent. This is an elite network of more than 18,000 professionals around the world. We have city-level chapters, we have country-level chapters. Basically, wherever you are in the world, wherever you go in the world in the future, you will find CEU alumni to interact with. And this network is a network that you can count on, and one of the key assets that we have. So if you want to reach out to people in a certain industry or in a certain country, in a certain city, or in a certain profession, feel free to reach out through our social media groups or in a structured way through our alumni relations department. We have a very American-driven approach when it comes to alumni relations, so they're reachable and easily approachable for you. So the obvious question is, how are we able to offer such a high quality program at only mentioned 29,000 euro of tuition? And the answer is pretty simple and lies in our founder and benefactor, George Soros, who created CEU with the mission to promote open society. Just recently, George Soros made a further contribution to CEU and its mission by offering another $1 billion with a B, in endowment to create the Open Society University Network, which means we are the best endowed university in Europe. So what does the executive MBA for the world mean? What makes CEU unique compared to other programs? First of all, when we talk about the open world, we mean skepticism towards dogmas, towards hierarchies and privileges, both in context of how we teach, but also in composition of the cohort. Diversity is key to creating a successful program. And diversity is part of our DNA. It's not just an empty marketing catchphrase for us. Secondly, we believe in radical, rational thinking and debate. Every idea can be challenged. We believe in facts and arguments rather than narratives and fake news. Because narratives and fake news create polarization in our societies these days. And we believe the best way to challenge this narrative-based discourse is to make arguments based on facts and realities, which is the hallmark of Karl Popper's definition of open societies. We're fundamentally opposed to all kinds of discrimination, and we actively promote diversity within our program. The way we finance the scholarship means we create opportunities for people who traditionally have not been able to actually join programs like this, or who are underrepresented on the business or the political level. And we see managers not just as people who deal with businesses and resources, but we also believe that managers go beyond that. Whatever their profession is, if it doesn't matter if you're coming from the traditional corporate world, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a medical doctor or an engineer, or coming from an NGO, civil rights movement, or the public sector, you are a positive change agent to help us promote open society. So what does the CEU Executive MBA classroom look like? Currently, we have 65 managers with an average of 14 years of work experience, including a minimum of 3 years of leadership/managerial experience. As you can see from the background image, we use state-of-the-art classroom technology and setups in order to facilitate lively debate and interaction and discussion in class. We make use of case-based learning rather than traditional lectures that you would find in local MBA programs. Because we want to take you, experts in your specific field, from this level of functional expertise to the strategic level. Of course, in times like this, we offer a top quality online experience. Every participant can choose to join online. Just to be clear, we encourage everybody to join us on site because on-site education is just unparalleled compared to online education. An MBA is more than just watching a video on Zoom or on YouTube about any given subject. It's about interaction in class. It's about debate in class, but it's also about the parts that are taking place outside class. It's about having lunch together, coffee breaks. It's about dinner parties and going out together and all these social activities that you cannot find when you're joining online. However, we understand that some people don't want to travel or cannot travel in times like this. And of course, we offer a flexible online participation. Speaking of online education, we have invested in studio-grade microphones capturing the lecturer and all participants, because we think that education is not just a one-way street from the lecturer to the participant, to the student. It's also a knowledge transfer from the participant to the lecturers and among fellows, among the participants. We have invested in large screens and high-quality cameras to offer the best audiovisual experience for you if you're joining online or if you need to better understand your fellows who are joining online. We have created physical virtual breakout rooms for support teams. Support teams are the groups that you will be placed in for group work and group presentations. And again, just to illustrate that diversity is not just a marketing catchphrase for us, we emphasize on diversity within the support teams already. You will not be placed in a group with people coming from the same country, coming from the same linguistic background or the same profession or industry. You will be placed in groups that offer the most of diversity available. because we think this is where the learning experience really kicks in. When you're exposed to different styles, different learning techniques, different solution-making techniques, different decision-making techniques, this is where you learn. You won't learn in a group with people who are just coming from the same country or the same industry or the same profession. You would basically tell the same stories to each other that you already know. As you see from the background image here, there's a color code. This helps you identify who belongs to which of these support teams and who has made a contribution to debate in class if you need to follow a debate online. On every level of your journey with us, we offer high quality individual support. If it's just from the beginning of just inquiring about the program to actually being interested about the program, to applying for the program, enrolling to the program, being in the program, or being an alumni, you deserve individual high quality support on every level. We are here for you. So tuition is 29,000 euros for the whole program and includes all the credits. It's tuition for the whole executive MBA. As I already said, we offer an online option if you can participate online, if traveling is inconvenient for you, or if you just don't want to travel. In order to defray your other costs, we have negotiated special rates with partner hotels in Vienna and Budapest, ranging from the budget level to luxury level. And we have also negotiated discount rates with partner airlines like Lufthansa Group and Austrian Airlines to further reduce your expenses when you're joining us on site. So I already mentioned at the very beginning that we have an offer for you, for the attendees tonight, but especially for bridge people. As I already said, we consider DNA as part of our diversity, part of our DNA, and not just an empty marketing catchphrase. That's why we implemented a lot of empowerment fellowships in order to encourage and empower groups of our society, people of our society, who we consider underrepresented in the business world and our societies in general. For example, we have established an LGBTIQ fellowship in cooperation with East Meets West. The winner of this fellowship will receive up to 50% reduction of the full CEU Executive MBA tuition of 29,000 euro. So you or people who might be interested that you would recommend to the program could basically split their tuition in half, because we proactively want to have LGBTIQ people in the program. And we don't consider this as charity. Don't get us wrong on this. We consider this as investment in future executive LGBTIQ talent. And the second fellowship, among many others, we have fellowships for business women, we have diversity fellowships, we have fellowships for the Roma minority in Central Europe. But of special interest for you tonight could be our CEU Executive MBA Fellowship for People Managers, aka HR managers. And again, the winner of this fellowship will receive up to 50% reduction of the full CEU Executive MBA tuition of 29,000 euro. So if you're applying for this fellowship and you happen to be lucky to be granted this fellowship, again, you could split your tuition in half and study at the second most international university in the world, get a US and EU accredited degree at only half of 29,000 euro. So we invite you to join the open world and become a positive change agent and help us promote open societies. The application deadline is March 27, and the application starts online on our website. It's a full online application. I strongly encourage you to apply as soon as possible, because we have a first come, first served policy. So the sooner you apply, the sooner you can reserve your study seat. You're very welcome to book an individual one-on-one consultation with me through our website. If you want to discuss your questions and optimize your application, if you have any specific question about the fellowships and scholarships that I already mentioned, or if you want, on behalf of your company or on behalf of your organization, you want to discuss collaboration or special rates, feel free to reach out to me. So I think it's one thing to hear about the program from us, from the program office, from CEU, because I mean, I hope you have seen that we are very much committed and passionately committed to this program. But of course, it's another thing to hear about the program from people who are in the program or who have already applied for the program, and to listen to their motivation. And for this reason, I'm happy to welcome tonight Marek Nowotny, who's joining us this year. He applied for this year's intake. He's a people manager and senior learning consultant at IBM. And thank you for joining us, Marek. He's a fellow of the East Meets West LGBTIQ Fellowship. If you could just briefly introduce yourself, like, what is your professional background? What is your personal background? And tell us about your motivation, why you applied for CEU Executive MBA.
Hi, Thomas. Good evening to everyone. I hope you hear me well.
Perfect.
Great. Well, it is a pleasure to be for the first time online on the ground of the Central European University. Just briefly, well, about myself. I come from Slovakia. I used to live up to 7 years abroad, mainly across Europe. I've studied social sciences, especially European affairs and foreign languages, which give me some strong background in this area. Then after my studies, I returned back to Slovakia, where I work till today, over 11 years in the area of human resources and employee development. So in the area of education. As you said, well, I have a combined role of a learning consultant and then the people manager and the soft skills trainer, which is actually the reality where you get after several years working for the same company. And here we aim to actually prepare or work on high quality personalized training for the needs of our internal clients. This is mainly what I'm doing as my full-time job. However, as you have correctly mentioned, for over, it will be actually this year 10 years that I am a volunteer, and for the past few years also a chairperson for an NGO called Diversity Pro locally in Slovakia. And our aim is to actually bring the knowledge, share experiences from the international environment in order to actually create equal treatment and equal opportunities for the minority people working in the Slovak working environment, and specifically the LGBTI community.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting background. I already mentioned that you are a fellow of the East Meets West fellow LGBTIQ fellowship. What made you apply for this fellowship? I mean, there's more to just being part of the LGBTI community to just apply for the fellowship, because there needs to be some special kind of motivation. What was your motivation for an application?
Well, first of all, I was aware of the executive MBA for quite some time, and was looking for the correct time and motivation to apply, because it is anyway a big time investment and a big decision in life in general. Living in Central Eastern Europe, in a country that is not so supportive to the LGBTI community, I for many years was trying to somehow make this situation a little bit more livable, not only for myself, but also for the community. Actually, one clever person once told me that you will feel only as free in your environment as much you are able to influence it. So through the means of the NGO, we are running various educational events, raising awareness across mainly the businesses, collaborate with various companies, associations, institutions in Slovakia, so that the local community can feel more at home and more welcome. And this led me to applying also for this LGBTIQ manager / entrepreneur scholarship at the Central European University.
I mean, you perfectly summarized our approach with these fellowships. We want to empower communities and not give away charities. So just to clarify, the LGBTIQ fellowship and all the other empowerment fellowships are merit-based. That means it's not enough to just to happen to be LGBTIQ. You have to have a track record of empowering other LGBTIQ people, or to be involved in the civil rights or humanitarian movement with this regard, and to be a positive change agent, as I already explained to you. So it's not charity for us, it's investment in future executive LGBTIQ talent. Thank you very much, Marek. I mean, that's basically it. I mean, you mentioned so many things. If you want to add something else, feel free to. Otherwise, I wouldn't move on to the next part of tonight's event, if you're fine with that.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this opening day. I'm sure that many talented people will get motivated and apply, and I'm looking forward to collaborate together.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marek.
Thank you.
I would like to move to the academic part of this evening, to our keynote presentation by Professor Matthias Marshall. He will talk about navigating professional life as an out person, past and present. Matthias, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's an honor to listen to your keynote speech. If you could briefly introduce yourself, like what is your professional, your personal background, and then move on. The floor would be yours for the keynote presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Thomas. And good evening to everyone. Yes, my name is Matthias Marshall. I'm currently the head of department of the Legal Studies Department and director of the doctoral school here as well. So again, I won't say much more in that sense of my background, because partly it's woven into what I'm going to talk about. And I think keynote speech is a little bit too pompous from what I was going to do and going to say here, partly about the issue about navigating, being out, navigating the workplace as a person who's out, and some of the issues that we face as openly gay people, but also, on the other hand as well, addressing the question of what non-gay cisgender people can do to help and to develop a workplace that is inclusive. So in that sense, of course, I think the main reason for gathering us here today, and I must say I found out only half hour before joining us here that this would be online, so I was really happy to be on site again. But again, this is life. This is the realities that we live in. But the main reason is, to showcase the executive MBA here, and to introduce ourselves and CEU as a university, but also as an employer. And so at the same time, as you heard as well, it's trying to link this event also to a broader issue, which some of you may have run into either as a directly concerned person or as someone who's handling or supporting a LGBTQI colleague or friend in the workplace. And so this is why I wanted to dig into a little bit the question about, what does it mean also to be out at the workplace? So at the risk, I might sound like a little bit like an old man at this point, but somehow I did want to share experiences about when I was younger. And so apologies for getting a little bit autobiographical at this moment. But the reality is that things have improved quite a bit societally, technologically, and also legally in a rather short time since that point. So I grew up as a gay youth in northern Italy in the late 80s, early 90s. And a little bit, you know, Marek, what you were saying, what you were just saying resounds to some extent how I felt back then. But of course, internet did not exist at that time. So that was, I was saying, when you talk about the technological advances and how that really impacted the way that growing up in the countryside without internet at that point, you feel completely isolated. And the little and only information you were able to get about the questions of LGBTQI issues was relating to AIDS mostly and to gay pride, and both things felt somehow distant, somehow not really clear, you know, what that meant, and it was a little bit scary, I must say, at the time as well. And sorry for getting a little bit into the legal discussions as well, but I am a lawyer by training. So Germany, many other countries, sodomy was still criminalized. So, and something that you were kind of painfully aware when within your family, you know, your father keeps referring to, well, I will never understand these paragraph 175 people. And so you kind of find out that, you know, that means the paragraph in the criminal code of Germany that was prohibiting sodomy at the time. So the workplace as well, and this leads us a little bit to this other point, the workplace and business in that sense. There was no explicit anti-discrimination law protecting from sexual orientation discrimination until the early 2000s in most European countries. So that as well constituted a very different reality that I hadn't met in those terms at that point. Of course, I was still in school or high school, and not to speak about marriage equality. So you see, in many ways, things were very, very different at that time. And from that perspective, it's actually quite surprising looking back at it now, and it's not such a long time ago, that it does feel like a different era, given the improvements that took place, at least in many European countries. But again, I don't want to reminisce too much or think too much back, because some of the comments that I wanted to get sort of like to you as well, and some of the thoughts were about being a little bit more concrete and forward looking, and to make a few remarks about the issue of being out navigating a workplace as an openly gay person. But in some ways, I want to address two groups. On the one hand, it's, you know, LGBTQI individuals, and the other, heterosexual cisgender individuals in this virtual room, but also more broadly. So as for the former, and sort of the first and most important point, I would like to say the good news is certainly, and I already mentioned it, that law does protect. It starts protecting, offering protections against workplace discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. So that really is, the legal frame is a different one than from the past. The second one is as well that there are a number of initiatives. I'm not going to list them all because they've like ballooned in many ways, but, you know, number of initiatives such as Open for Business, where you can find out if certain employers are gay friendly or not. So, you know, if you have a chance of finding out these initiatives, that can be helpful as well. At least you may expect some support in those kind of workplace and will be provided. And it may also influence your future choices, whether it's your education, but also your future employers. The third, and this is actually in a more personal level, coming and being out of the workplace brings its very own challenges. So I worked in different places. The military, well, the military was an obligation, but military, law firms, European Commission, and universities, and also in different countries. So Austria, France, Italy, Hungary, the United States. And so there is a different approach, depending on possibly age as well, but also experience. So in some workplaces, I would simply not be out. Either I didn't feel comfortable by myself, and you know, without surprise, that workplace was the military. So you can imagine that being in the Austrian military as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, you're struggling with issues beyond that. So coming out was really not an option in that kind of environment. In others, you would mention it to some people, but not to others, to some colleagues and not the others. And that was for me the case of the European Commission. And in others, again, I'd be out. This is the case for me here at CU. but also at the time that I was working in a Silicon Valley law firm. So there are places where at least you feel comfortable, and it's gauging, getting a sense of where you can do that or not. So, but even then, so beyond evident, homophobic or transphobic remarks that you might hear, even in places where seemingly all is fine, you may still find yourself in situation and lingering doubts about bias when something bad might happen to you, and like being laid off or something else not being promoted. And then you wonder, even in workplace where there is a seeming openness to questions of diversity. So you will always have to deal with that, unfortunately, to some extent. Um, and as to handling how to do, or coming and being out in the workplace, in companies, there is no one size fits all rule. This is not so I think the most important thing is listen to yourself, your gut feelings, uh, what is right for you at that specific moment of time in your life, and also whom you can trust, whom you feel comfortable talking to, and whom you want to share your story with. So again, all of that depends. So what I want to say is, you do not all need to be an LGBTQI activist in your workplace as such. This is not necessarily the point. So, and the other thing is that I would say, as a recommendation again in navigating this reality, is do not still, like, for your own mental health as well, do not try to remain isolated. We've seen how COVID has really impacted and how much we are social animals, sort of, how much we need a live, on-site human interaction. And this maybe also builds into this idea that, the executive MBA is ideally sort of an on-site kind of reality. And I think we felt how much it does make a difference between on-site education or online education. But the workplace, again, back to this point, is really an important aspect and location of such interaction. So in some ways, don't try to isolate yourself completely. I think for mental health reasons as well, it really is an important point. But again, this aspect leads me to the second group that I mentioned that I also wanted to address, are straight allies and cisgender allies and friends and colleagues, because here again, they're just as important in the workplace. And yes, sort of, but maybe important, but for slightly different reasons. So in some ways, the exhortation would be there to provide support. And support is coming in various ways. But, it's easier possibly for those allies to be the activist. So without necessarily suffering the potentially negative consequences. So I think really there is that aspect here that I would like to highlight. So for you guys, combat, homophobia, transphobia, where you see it or hear it, rather than becoming sort of the staying silent and becoming a bystander. I think there's less to lose from that perspective, at least, than it is for someone who is him or herself, LGBTQI, or themselves LGBTQI community. At another level, instead, and so I'll come to a conclusion. I don't want to take too much time from you because it's really like an important moment. But at another level, you might want to remain silent and wait until a colleague whom you think is LGBTQI to come up to you and open up. So I've worked in one of the places. I was constantly being asked whether I preferred Giovanna or Alberto by my boss. And that is really not helpful in terms of trying to open up and then telling me, well, I have no problems with gay people. So, how do you address these moments in the workplace? How do you navigate those situations? So that is always so again, in that sense, if you're working with someone and that person, wait for them to open up to you. Do not try to push them, even in a friendly way might be. So again, it is not easy. I also say, between finding a balance between being patient and being proactive for the straight cisgender friends. But again, at the same time, much of the concrete help I have received was actually from these allies and friends and or family members. So I think that was really really important often to get that kind of support. So somehow, in concluding to what I wanted to say is, certainly, and looking forward, things have become easier in many places and companies. So I'm aware as well that this is not necessarily the reality everywhere, that there's still a lot to do. And this is partly as well, why CU wants to sponsor these kind of scholarships as well. and especially a lot to do also with regard to transgender people. For some companies, it might be an easy way to do some pink washing, as it's been called. And also, what I would also like to remind everyone, the risk of backsliding is there. And sorry, I'm looking at, at Maciej Kisielowski. So certain things happening in some countries, don't presume that everything is already for sure. Backsliding is a possibility, and that might affect also the way that your workplace or the freedom at your workplace is actually developing. But to finalize here, and it's so people like you who will do that work in the future, I hope with the kind of education, with the critical engagement and expertise that you will receive at and bring yourself to CEU and the executive MBA, that will make that change. So I really hope that you will enjoy the future experience, and that we can deliver whichever group you belong to. So thank you so much for your patience. I don't want to take much more of your time. It's a pleasure. I would have wished that this were on site or live, but again, so we will meet for sure. I'll be around if you're in Vienna. So thanks so much. And I see there's questions, so I'm not sure whether I should answer them directly in the chat.
I have collected questions who came in direct messaging, so I would collect them for you and moderate those questions if you don't mind. The first question might sound naive, but in a concrete context, what else is to do in order to fight discrimination? Because we sometimes hear that equality has been established. There's LGBTIQ marriage possible. So sometimes the provocative, not even offending question might come up. What else needs to be done according to your expertise?
Yeah, operationalize, because as I said, on the one hand, the legislation is there, but then making it sort of work, making it operational at a daily basis is not the same thing. There's other constraints. So that comes then with this kind of like, bystanders, active, friends and allies that are helping, rather than always being the only person who's going to raise the point. And there's parallels with regard to questions of gender equality here. So it's a daily kind of work. But of course, the legal framework having been put in place does provide a little bit of a backbone to that kind of daily work that needs to be done. And then it's also addressing certain things in a very open and friendly way, talking to some colleagues and saying, look, this was not fine what you said, to another colleague or to myself. So these kind of everyday kind of issues can help. And also we also need to be aware that in coming out or being out of the workplace, for some people it might mean that you're the first gay person that they run into. And yes, you might need to be tolerant. I don't like necessarily the word, but accepting that, for others it is a learning process. For many of my friends and families around, it has been a learning process dealing with this in the 80s and 90s. So that we on ourselves as well don't take it too personally if someone doesn't understand, and that we're patient with them. So I don't think it's necessarily much more about, well, I could say, well, the law, there's still, you can broaden out the law, the scope of the legislation and the application, and that some countries don't implement it in a correct way. But I think a lot happens at these daily interactions. And that's why I also believe profoundly that degrees like the executive MBA with such a global outreach really is about listening, learning from each other. And it goes both ways, because the experience that I have lived certainly is so much more different than the experience of someone who's a lesbian from Namibia, or who can be. So again, but this is then listening and learning from each other. So I think that is really important, both at universities, but also in a workplace.
Thank you very much. Since you collected so many experiences working in different companies, organizations, in general terms, what would you recommend to companies, which measures they can implement in order to create an inclusive and welcoming environment? Do you happen to have scientific evidence or academic surveys?
Scientific evidence, not. I'm sure there's studies in what can be done, but clearly, and it is interesting. And again, this is not to put blame or anything. So in the personal life. So this move, something that really caught my eye, and in many different ways, was the move from Hungary to Austria that CEU had to do in part. But it was really interesting to just drive 2 hours west. And here in Austria, and it happened to be in June that I moved, and so everywhere were pride flags, everywhere, on the tramways, on the public buildings. And it was just such a like a shock to the system, seeing that in this way. So a company, and so my brother, who's working for the Austrian railroads, he said, oh, this month we hung up a flag in a very friendly way. We hung up a huge flag outside of the building. Yes, and I was thinking a little bit cynically, well, yes, it's easy, but the truth is, it does make you feel more welcome. Whether or not, then you might have a boss or a colleague that deals with questions, and that they have issues then even within those specific companies. But the symbolics and of that really do make a difference. And that's why I also felt always very much at home at CU. So in that sense, that this a company can make with very few things actually quite a big difference in that sense, with putting up a flag or sponsoring some things. So with very little, you can actually make someone feel at home, really.
Speaking of symbolism and sponsoring, what's your take on pink washing, especially with companies who are not, credible when it comes to LGBT rights? I mean, we know companies who are very credible with LGBT issues, but of course, let's talk about FIFA, for example, with when they prohibited the rainbow ribbon to wear, or when they allocate games to countries where homophobia or even LGBT are prohibited, or where it's illegal, but still companies are advertising in the same context with LGBT topics, or the woke kind of feel of way of life. What's your take on that?
So again, at the risk of sounding like an aging or older man, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said, I would have said, oh, it's hypocrisy. Now, what we've seen happening with whether we want to call it illiberalism or authoritarianism, and Trump and other rulers coming up, I have a slightly different take, because those would not even have put up that flag, period, wouldn't have used it. So again, there's still something, even in that little symbolic gesture. And then one thing is, of course, then trying to unveil and critique and showing up that these companies, holding these companies up to their values, but at least companies are states. So this is not necessarily as much about private business as, states as well try to pink wash themselves. But again, holding them accountable, showing what they're not doing, holding them accountable to the values that they're symbolically putting up. Because if they're not even doing that, how can I hold someone like Trump accountable for anything? He's never stood up for anything in terms of, whether it's human rights or that. So I would have thought 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have said, oh, it's so hypocritical. I'd rather have someone who's very open about it, and who openly says, I don't care about this. But honestly, my mindset has changed a little bit. And I'm thinking more and more, well, at least they're trying to. Yes, there's certainly an interest, but maybe we call it interest convergence. The interest of the business converges with some kind of diversity interest. And then, it's up to us individuals or people working in these places to make that interest a little bit more concrete. So, and holding them up to the values that they're seemingly endorsing and embracing.
In this context, I remember Pride Month, when all the major companies changed their logos into a rainbow style, but the subsidiaries in Saudi Arabia, of course, did not. Like BMW, Mercedes, Nike, they all had the rainbow logos of course, in the Western world. But of course, their LinkedIn profiles or Facebook profiles in Saudi Arabia didn't change. I mean, I was kind of amused, let's put it that way, in that sense. I mean, of course, it's tragic, but what's your take on this kind of hypocrisy?
Yeah, well, the official version of it is that, well, we need to comply with legislation in certain places. So then in those places, well, the rule is a different one, and sodomy is being criminalized, still penalized. And so the diversity of, you know, as much as a company might have an official policy, the diversity then in the reality is sort of like, well, we play by the rules that are existing at the national level. And if they're doing business in Saudi Arabia or in other places, then that's the sort of official diversity that is being recognized in this way. Yes, you know, technically I also think that there is something to be said, but then probably it's showing up these issues, showing up these different problems that come up. But the same thing could be said with regard to headscarf bans. You know, some companies that make business in the United Kingdom, where the Muslim headscarf is completely fine, and then the same company can, under a laïcité charter in France or in Belgium, legally prohibit that. And so, so again, you find this issue. I'm not trying to say that this makes it any better, but there is a conundrum there about companies that are trying, and they navigate these waters. And probably some of you will have to navigate this in the future as future managers and dealing with these issues, and how do you address them? And what is the benefit and what is the downside of having to deal with these various cultural, legal, societal frameworks that global companies are dealing with?
We have a question from Pavel Schubert from Raiffeisen Bank International. Pavel, I wish you could be here tonight. I know that the whole bridge event and the whole open day would be so much more fun if we could have the opportunity, if we had the opportunity to meet in person and to mingle and network. I mean, it is as it is. I mean, it's our Omicron everyday life, but we'll have the opportunity in the future to meet again. But you asked a question for Matthias, which is, in your keynote, you mentioned Open for Business Coalition, good example of leading corporates in D&I. Where else can one, when deciding to join or not join a new company?
I mean, as I said, in some ways, you know, internet is a source of information. I mean, there's probably the initiatives are many and abound. So partly this was, Pavel, a little bit when internet didn't exist, that was really an issue. Now, again, you know, these initiatives, you find, you type them in, you try to look out. So there is quite a bit. So I wouldn't want to, I just mentioned one, and I don't have now at the moment many others or thoughts but I'm sure that it would be fairly easy to figure out in which ways to find organizations, associations that are providing that kind of support and that kind of initiatives. So again, the reality with internet has really, that's what I said, you know, in 20 years, the technology has really helped gay youth in particular as well out of isolation. It's created other issues, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that it's all amazing, but in that sense, to get them out of isolation, and even for workers and employees to have a look and figure out and find them out. I just mentioned this one as one example.
And a follow-up question from Pavel. Pavel, by the way, you're very much welcome to unmute yourself and talk to us if you want to.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would ask the question. Hey, and it's really pity that we cannot meet at the campus, but at the same time, I really do appreciate, I mean, the fastness of actually putting us on a kind of alarm. No, we cannot go there. We need to move online. So it's great, and I appreciate that you take these things very seriously. And Matthias, thanks for answering the question. I actually have one additional one, because in your bio we can read that you probably have experience from both of the worlds. So which means from US and from Europe. Do you see any difference when it comes to the approach to diversity and inclusion in Europe and in the US? Or maybe this is the same, we still talk about the same thing.
So I would say that putting the US into one bucket is, so my experience was a very specific one, because as I said, I worked in a Silicon Valley law firm. I did an LLM degree at Berkeley. So that isn't representative of what the US and sort of like a big chunk of the US actually represents. So it was in a sort of bubble that attracted specifically LGBTQI people for the sort of like freedom that was existing there. So I doubt that had I been working in a law firm somewhere in the Midwest, maybe in Tulsa or in Oklahoma City, I might have been as forthcoming, or in Alabama, in Mobile, Alabama. So I think the differences might be more. So I find more similarities maybe between what, you know, the Bay Area and what Europe was, even though at the time this was in the late 1990s, I felt that there were, for the Bay Area, certainly for San Francisco, was ahead in many, many ways. There were professional associations, LGBTQI lawyers associations that you could join. So that was for me an eye opener. So I think, I don't want to put it in this way that Europe is catching up or Western Europe or not. So this is not necessarily the point. But from that perspective, had I been in the Southwest, in the Midwest, or in the South of the United States, it would have been a very, very different experience. So I don't necessarily think that the comparison would be as much United States as a whole with Europe as a whole, but West Coast, maybe East Coast, New York, with certain parts of Europe, and then maybe that would be probably rather what I would have looked at. And it creates strange kind of logics as well, that you feel more attracted to going to a certain area because you feel that in another area your experience at the workplace or in your everyday life might be a very different one. So I'm not sure it's really satisfactory, my answer, but overall, I think I would rather say it in this way. The United States is huge, and huge differences.
Pavel, are you satisfied with the answer?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Just one addition from Marek. He said, in response to Pavel, employers that support D&I at the workplace may have in the EU countries signed the Diversity Charter. Can you please tell us something about the Diversity Charter, Matthias?
Yeah, companies have been doing that. So there's various ways. Either they call it diversity charters, or they call them, I mean, there's a number of ways, either codes of ethics. So there's various initiatives that have, or human rights, so that there's a, sort of the UN developed guidelines for human rights and business. So again, so some companies are looking into that and actively addressing that. So that might be helpful as well in sort of determining beyond, you know, looking for certain things that companies have been developing these in the past 10 to 15 years. So some are more specific, others keep it more generic. So in some places, I might think that they might also become a requirement. So these become then regulatory issues, where you see the institutionalization of some of these issues, that some for some reasons, to be listed, you need to have certain documents available. So you need to have a gender equality charter, you need to have maybe a diversity charter, you need to have certain documents and then the problem becomes a little bit, it's almost ticking off a list that the companies then put these documents together, and then if you don't follow up even internally, but that's why we need experts that know the business, but that then also know these charters and how to do that, and following up internally within companies on the actual application, because otherwise they remain sort of dead pieces of paper that are needed to list your company on a specific, I don't know, whether it's a stock exchange or something, and then they remain dead letters. So, but at least there again, if these documents are there, like with these flags, they might be symbolic, but at least, you know, if someone knows them, then you can operationalize them. It takes energy, it takes time, but again, so these diversity charters have been coming up for various reasons, good intention, sometimes a little bit more ticking off the list, and but again, once they're there, they can change the rules of the game.
Thank you very much. I did not receive any more questions about your keynote presentation, so I would like to move on. Seeing that Maciej sneaked into this open day and remained silent, I'm totally surprised that Maciej remained silent for so long, but I'm so happy that he's here, and I would like to involve him in this discussion because I have received 2 questions from HR people who joined us tonight. The first question for you, Maciej, is how are we dealing with the COVID situation?
Mm-hmm.
The elephant in the room. I mean, today it's just.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much. And we're so sorry that we can't host you on campus. Yes, it's an interesting evening for the question about COVID situation. Thank you so much, Matthias, for the very, very thoughtful presentation. Actually, you know, this February-March time period was also very, very difficult for us last year. This was the only module since the start of the pandemic which we had fully online, which I think is a great success. The fact that since the start we had only one module fully online. Every other module had an on-site option. But the one that was fully online was a short 4-day module about that time a year ago. Yes, so and it was similar situation like today, which is that, you know, actually in that case, in that situation was, in addition, there were travel restrictions, as we remember, but you know, but cases spike on campus, and then situation is becomes very difficult. However, I also want to say that, you know, all other modules were on site, including every long module that we had, the 9-day. So how do we do it? We of course make use of the amazing infrastructure that Vienna provides, and I think we should also emphasize like how important it is to have well-functioning government. Because, you know, Matthias mentioned this problem. I'm originally from Poland, although I, you know, I left Poland for my studies in the US 20 years ago, and I've never worked in Poland. But of course, I monitor and even comment on situation in Poland quite frequently, and one aspect of these governments that are backsliding, that are spending so much energy to vilify people, is that they quite callously disregard other tasks of governing. Yes, so for example, my country has one of the highest death rates from COVID. Yes, at the time when the government is busy vilifying, you know, LGBTQ community and you know, and introducing patriarchal draconian abortion laws. So I think we can also point out that we are quite lucky living in not only country, but you know, city-state that is run, you know, just extraordinarily well. Yes, and that helps us. So everybody who comes to our module, you know, uses the Vienna infrastructure to do, you know, basically daily PCRs at the city's expense. We of course add to this, if needed, antigens, which we do at the university expense, masks, distancing. So all in all, I want to say that we've all but one module, basically hybrid, on-site, online, but with an on-site option. We didn't have a single case during our modules, not one. Yes, and you know, we have, you know, hundreds of students going through those, and so I think it shows you that it is possible, even with this difficult situation, it is possible to manage it prudently. And I think what Matthias was saying about isolation adds a profound, you know, conclusion that I think moving forward, people will, as we need to live with the virus, people will start making very conscious choices what kind of activities can go online in their lives and what kind of activities need to stay on site. And I believe that high quality experiential education will be one of those activities that will not go online, that people will take a measure of risk, because it's just so important for the experience, for your personal and professional development, that this will be one of the activities that will stay on site. That's my prediction.
I mean, tonight perfectly shows how much we would have enjoyed hosting, welcoming you on campus. We prepared catering for you. You know, we've prepared a huge event for you to get to know you. Unfortunately, COVID puts a spike in our wheel, but we promise, Mikasa, Sukasa, you'll have the opportunity to meet again on campus for another bridge event where when we will be able to actually meet and get to know each other. Maciej, in view of the time, I would like to move on to the last question, but very interesting one and a very HR-related question. What's the benefit for companies of the executive MBA? We've talked about the applicant's perspective, like how are people, applicants and participants benefiting from the program, but how are companies and organizations benefiting from our program?
Excellent question. So one of the most interesting trends going on, and I think here also Europe is slightly playing catch up, but not a distant one, is this move from this old-fashioned, pure return on investment motive associated with conglomerates like GE, which were just split, yes, which basically collapsed, to a much more what we call in the in management a much more purpose-driven organization. So an organization that treats profit as kind of a byproduct, a necessary precondition of reaching a certain objective, social, even maybe artistic, aesthetic. I mean, for Apple, yes, it's so much a sense of beauty as simplicity, yes. So in this move towards more purpose-driven enterprise, I think it's really useful for your executives of your business to be able to experience a program that is in itself purpose-driven, yes. And actually, it's interesting because we have a lot of quite conservative, there is a group of quite conservative participants, who may be much more, center-right in terms of their politics or views than maybe much of CU faculty, but they appreciate the idea of participating in something where people really passionately believe in what they are doing, yes. And I think that is very unusual for business programs in Europe. Most business programs are much more kind of vocational, have a spirit of vocational school. They are usually standalone or in an economic university. It's much more an American model to have an MBA as part of a fully fledged research university. As we know, all the big business schools are part of the universities, but this is much more an American model, which of course we embrace as an American university. So you have this, this experience, you have all the, skills that you get from an MBA, but in addition, you have this experience of interacting with this very high purpose-driven community, university, fully fledged university community. We call it campus experience, yes, because it is really something more than just the content of the classes. It is this overall experience of seeing a very driven, very purpose-oriented community. And I think this is the program, whose time has come, because in many other organizations that approach is being embraced. So how better to learn this approach than by experiencing it during your mid-career program. I hope that answers.
Thank you very much, Maciej. Since we have so many people coming from diversity management or the HR world online tonight, I would really encourage you and invite you to get in touch with me. I just posted the link in the chat. Feel free to get in touch with me via email or by booking a time slot for a Zoom meeting with me. Let's discuss your company's needs. Let's discuss your potential application. And I have just one wish for tonight. Realize the opportunity and talk to your staff, talk to your colleagues about this opportunity, bring it into your company and just talk about it in your company. If there's an opportunity, if there's need for executive education with a very strong focus on diversity and inclusion in a very international setting. That's all. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, Matthias, for your keynote speech. Thank you very much, Pavel and Bridge, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Marek and Maciej, for joining us tonight. We'll stay in touch and we'll do a Bridge 11 maybe together here on campus. I hope so. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.